and hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, then make sure to click the subscribe button. My name's Chloe, and for today's video I've decided to film my January wrap-up. The first book that I read in January was I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. This is a book I've heard so much about on BookTube and on Bookstagram, and just in general when people are talking about books and thrillers, this tends to be one that they name. It's been spoken about a lot, especially since Netflix came out with the film adaptation of it in December, I think, last year. And I got this for Christmas and I was super excited. It's a book that's been on my radar for ages and I've heard loads of great things about it, so I was so excited to read it, especially because it's always been described as being a very dark thriller, which I really enjoy. I'm not going to say too much about the plot of the book because I personally feel like I would have enjoyed it even more if I had have known next to nothing about it. I think it's one of those books that you can definitely go into not knowing anything about. I think just knowing the title is good enough. However, I will give you a couple of tidbits about what this book is about. Put into few words, this book is about a boyfriend and girlfriend who are going on a trip. They're going to visit the boyfriend's parents who live out in the countryside. So this book involves a lot of sort of countryside, desolate vibes. There's sections of it which are at night, which are super atmospheric because we've got this dark, desolate countryside roads, that kind of thing going on, which I really enjoyed. And something that made this book absolutely live up to the hype that I've heard about it is the fact that there was such a massive plot twist, and I mean so big. The author has managed to walk the line of not being something that is really easy to guess, but at the same time being so realistic and so obvious once you find out what the plot twist is. That's all I'm going to say about this book, but it was great and I recommend it to anyone that likes thrillers because it was just so much fun, and I read it in like a day or something like that. And I'm not a particularly fast reader. I don't know if I've mentioned it, but I gave this book 5 stars. I thought it was just so amazing. The second book that I read in January was The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This is the author's second thriller that she's ever written, and I read her first one, which was The Hunting Party. I read that last year and I really enjoyed that. I really enjoy her writing style. I think that it's super interesting. It feels like it could almost be like a soap opera sort of thing because there's so many different perspectives, points of views. There's a lot of drama between the characters, and I found that both to be true with The Hunting Party but also with The Guest List. The Guest List for me was just as good as The Hunting Party, if not slightly better, just because of the atmosphere of the book and the, again, sort of desolate vibes. It's a wedding set on a remote island. We've got lots of characters in play and there's a lot of relationships going on between the characters which are really interesting, and which for me was one of the driving forces of the plot. If it weren't for the fact that these characters had such interesting dynamics and relationships, I don't think that I would have enjoyed it as much as a thriller. I don't think it's the most groundbreaking thriller that's ever been written. I think it's really well written, especially when it comes to the relationships, as I said. So obviously at the heart of this we've got this wedding, which obviously involves the relationship between the bride and the groom. On top of that we've got other characters such as the bride's half sister. We've got just, yeah, lots of different friends and family members, and they've all got their own secrets and their own past, and there's a lot of mystery. There's a lot of chaos going on because, as you can imagine with a thriller, especially when it centers around a relationship or something as big as a wedding, there's always going to be something crazy going on. And I gave it 4 stars. The third book that I read this month was the first and only non-fiction book that I read this month. I don't read a lot of non-fiction, but this was one of the non-fiction books that I have had on my list for a very long time, ever since that I found out that it existed, and that is On Writing by Stephen King. This is his, I think this is 1 out of 2 of his non-fiction books that he's written. I would describe it as being half biography about Stephen King, about his childhood and how he got into writing, and half of a sort of how-to guide to writing. So for sure, if you're interested in writing and you want, or interested in creative writing, then definitely check this book out. But I'd also recommend it if you're just in general a fan of Stephen King's work, because he does mention a lot of his famous works, a lot of his iconic books such as Carrie. There's a lot of interesting things that I wouldn't have known about him and which make me appreciate his work even more than I already did. So there's not much else to say about that except from the fact that I absolutely loved it. I usually do not rate non-fiction work, but for this one, because it's Stephen King, I sort of felt like I had to. I loved it so much, so I gave it 5 stars. Big surprise. So far in this wrap up, we've had 2 5 stars and a 4 star. If you cannot work it out yet, I'm not very picky when it comes to my ratings. I sort of just rate things willy-nilly. It's all over the place. The 4th book that I read in January was another book that I have been so excited to read. Again, I got this one for Christmas. This is another one of the books that I've heard a lot about from some of my all-time favourite booktubers, such as Gabby Reads. She says this is one of her all-time favourite books ever. And the book that I'm talking about is, of course, The Troop by Nick Cutter. This book was just so much fun. I'm not even going to beat around the bush. I gave this 5 stars, of course I did. I'm not going to say much. All I'm going to say is body horror, gore, disgusting, and essentially it centres around a group of Boy Scouts who are on a remote island. Yet again, the theme of the remote island, which is just particularly great for atmosphere and for reading something that feels creepy and dark and makes you feel almost like you're alone. It was so much fun. At the beginning of this book, we're introduced to a man who appears on this island, and this man is extremely thin. He's clearly really undernourished. But at the same time, he's extremely hungry and he eats lots and lots and lots. He eats whatever he can get his hand on, to the point where it's not just food, but it's also trying to get at other things that he can consume. But because of the way he looks, you can tell that obviously this food is doing absolutely nothing for him. So we're trying to work out, along with these boys who encounter this man, we're trying to work out what is going on, why is he like that. There's a lot of questions, there's a lot of intrigue and mystery. Aside from the plot being absolutely fantastic and so intriguing, the relationship between the 5 or 6 boys, I think it is, the main characters, their relationship and their dynamic is so interesting. It reminds me actually a bit of It, in the sense that we're following this group of children that just have these really interesting dynamics. Also, this book is written in a, what I would call like a mixed media format, as well as there being obviously just the narrative chapters. There's interviews, there's evidence logs, there's just a bunch of different things in between the chapters which are really interesting to read. Adds to the world that the author has created within this book. 5 out of 5 stars, recommend, you should go and get this. The 5th book I read in January was The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. I'm not going to talk too much about this book because I think it's an absolutely amazing book for what it talks about. Essentially, this book is about a slave that is trying to escape the plantation that she grew up on. Due to the theme of slavery, there's very somber parts of this book. There's also an underlying sense of hope because we're rooting for her to escape. In that sense, this book was absolutely amazing, and I would definitely, no matter what my personal opinion of the book was, of how it was written, I would definitely recommend it to anyone and everyone. And I think it's super important that people, especially people that are white, essentially, that we read more diverse literature and that we read from authors of colour. From a personal perspective, and I'm not going to talk about this too much because I don't actually think it was that important. I think it was completely down to me as a person. I didn't feel that connected to the characters, and it did sort of take away from my reading experience. I think a lot of it comes down to my shortcomings, the fact that this isn't part of my history, so I can't relate to it as strongly as maybe a person of colour could. However, that didn't take away from the fact that this was an absolutely amazing book due to what it's talking about. I just sort of wish that I had a bigger connection to the characters. So I gave this 3 stars, but 3 stars from me is still an extremely good rating. The 6th book that I read last month in January was The Glass Hotel. This is one of the books that I got from my cousins and my aunt and uncle for Christmas, and I absolutely love it. I think aesthetically it's got to be my favourite book that I got for Christmas. It's just so gorgeous. It's got just... I'm not much of an aesthetic reader, but at the same time, look at those end pages. They're so pretty. This is another thriller. Surprise, surprise. Can you guess what my favourite genre of book is? So this is a thriller. I don't know what you would class it as under the category thriller, so I'm just going to call it a thriller for now. I started reading this book, got about a quarter into it and realised I did not have a clue what this book was about going into it, which I thought I did, because I thought, based off of what I had heard about Station 11, that The Glass Hotel would be a similar sort of book as it's written by Emily St. John Mandel, which I didn't actually mention before, but that's who wrote it. I thought that it'd be really similar, but it wasn't. It was completely different, and I'm not even gonna try and describe what it's about, because it's a really complex thriller, which I really enjoyed. But at the same time, it was just a tiny bit confusing, because once again, this is one of those thrillers that has a lot of different perspectives, and it was still manageable. I still understood it, but I think it was just walking the line of potentially becoming too much for me personally. I mean, I found it to be a really enjoyable thriller, and I thought it was really good. The only thing that was the downfall was my downfall, basically. The fact that I thought it was about something completely different going into it, and was really surprised when I found out what it actually was about. On the level of writing, I thought this was one of the best books that I've read. I really vibed with the writing. I loved just the way that this book was written. I think there were some quotes in there that I really enjoyed, which, you know, I could have been clever and written them down, but I didn't, probably because I was lazy and I couldn't be asked to do it. I also felt that this book was very intricate. It was almost like a spider web, that all these different characters and points of views come together, and then there's just this amazing reveal of what's actually going on. But yeah, I would definitely recommend this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So now we've come to the last 3 books that I read in January, and I'm just gonna put all of these books together because they are part of the series. They're the last 3 books in a series that I've been reading for probably about the last year and a half. I think I've been slowly collecting these books because I've been buying them secondhand. The last 3 books that I read in January were the last 3 books in a series of unfortunate events. I have a lot to say about this series, but I'm not gonna dwell on it too much in this video. Maybe I'll make a separate video about the whole series. I really enjoyed these books. I gave every single book in the series 5 stars because they're just, for me, so fun and so whimsical and just really enjoyable that I don't want to give them anything less than 5 stars. So I'm just going to quickly go over these 3 books. The 7th book I read this year was The Grim Grotto, and I'm not going to give synopses on these books just because it sort of ruins what's happened or spoils what's happened in the other books. And the 12th book, which was the 8th book I read this month, The Penultimate Peril. And the 9th book that I read this month, which is the 13th book in the series, which is the end. I think that out of the whole series, that the 12th book, the Penultimate Peril, has got to be my favourite, because this book is essentially just an accumulation of everything that's happened in the 11 books before. As far as children's books go, I think these have got to be some of the best written children's books ever. Some of the things that I really enjoy about this series is how over the top the characters feel. In particular, all the adult characters feel very caricature-like, they feel very irresponsible, and essentially what the author has done is turned it on its head, and it's the children that are the responsible ones. That was my January wrap-up. They were all the books that I read in January. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, if you want to see more content from me, then remember to subscribe. Click the bell button if you want to get notifications every time that I upload a video. If you really enjoy my videos and you can't get enough of my bookish content, then make sure you follow my Instagram, which will be linked down below, as well as my Goodreads page. Thank you for watching this video. Goodbye.